All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Friday, everybody's favorite day, yes? Fun weekend plans?
Yes.
Yes? You're just going to be speeding around Vancouver?
No, actually, I got a lesson.
Oh,
I
okay.
got the speeding ticket.
You got a ticket already? Oh, my God. Okay, other fun weekend plans that don't involve breaking the law? My gosh. No, you're all going to break the law on the weekend, so you're not telling me? Don't tell me. I don't want to be. I don't want to be an accessory to your crimes. just keep me out of it. Oh boy. Okay. Yeah. Well, I hope everyone has a nice weekend. I think we're at the part of the term where there's probably not that much homework, or maybe no homework, so you can sleep and relax and have some fun. I don't know. Is the weather going to be nice?
It might rain.
Oh yeah. It's Saturday's a bit wet, but Sunday's better. I forget. Oh, okay. Either way, a weekend is a weekend, right? I'm going to say hi to some people. Amanpreet is here. Good morning, Amanpreet. Oh, I'm here. Good morning, Mike. Sarah's here. Good morning, Sarah again. Michelle's here. Hello, Michelle. Adon is here. Good morning, Adon. Hadil is here. Hello, Hadil. Good morning. Irene is here. Good morning. Good morning, Miss. Well, good morning to you too. Ivan's here. Good morning, Ivan. So, yesterday, if you recall, we were in the middle of kind of talking about culture and what it was, right? And we said culture was a system of shared beliefs and values and customs and artifacts that members of a society use, right? And that culture was kind of important because A, we're not born with it, right? It has to be taught to us. And B, it's kind of a tool that helps us to interact with our environment and to interact with each other and cooperate with each other, because cooperation is a key aspect of what human beings do. We're not individual creatures. We're not loners. Well, some of us are kind of loners, but really what we are social group animals that live in big groups and we cooperate with each other. We said yesterday that there were 4 characteristics of culture here that I wanted to tell you about, that culture was symbolic and learned and integrated and shared. And so we talked about a few ways in which culture was symbolic, right? So people within a culture communicate through symbols in all kinds of different ways, right? In the way that we speak, the words that we use, the gestures that we use, our clothing, all of these kind of symbols carry meaning, and we're constantly communicating meaning to each other, encoding our meaning in symbols or decoding the symbols of other people, right? And so we talked about a few things yesterday. We talked about the fact that sometimes a lot of this cultural information is implicit, it's implied, it's kind of under the surface. And so we talked about the chess game, and we saw the chess game has a lot of cultural meaning wrapped up in it. Is it just a game? Sure, just a game. But that game is a product of a culture, and it encodes cultural meaning. And so in playing it, we also absorb this cultural meaning as well, right? The sort of, maybe the usefulness of war to solve conflict, maybe. Or the value of strategy, the value of winning, right? The idea that society is stratified, right? There are people who are higher up, who have more power and more options, and maybe are more important. That's what the lesson is anyway. And then there are people at the bottom who are maybe less important and have kind of less opportunities. All those messages are kind of encoded in the game. We talked a little bit about our friends, the Kwakwaka'wakw, yesterday, right? And I walked you through what a ritual might look like to induct new members into the Cannibal Bird Society. And that sort of whole ritual, even though it seemed probably quite, or it would have seemed quite odd to our eyes to actually see it, to the Kwakwaka'wakw it makes perfect sense, because it's very much in line with their experience of the world and the way that they live, and also the cultural meanings that they've already absorbed, right? So we may see a ritual like this and say, yikes, that's bizarre, right? And it may very well be bizarre, but to the Kwakwaka'wakw, it makes perfect sense, right? It's like, yes, of course, we know what's happening here, we understand the meaning, right? Yeah, so we talked about those, we talked about these guys. Sorry, I'm just gonna skip through. We talked about that. Oh yeah, we also talked, oh yeah, and so we talked about, in the process of that, we talked about culture being learned, that we've all gone through a process of enculturation and probably are still going through that process, the process by which we kind of learn our cultural values and norms and behaviors, right? Right, so the chess game, we talked about the Kwakwaka'wakw, and then this is right where this is where we ended, right? Okay, let's talk football. Does anyone here watch football, American football? Not the real football, a little bit. Maybe not watch, but have you seen a football game at least? Yeah, okay, we're all familiar with, either from movies, lots of American movies feature football games or are all about football. Football's a big thing in the US, right? Even, so in the US, the professional league is the NFL, right? The National Football League, and that's their professional level of football. But they also have a college league below that. And even the college league is a big deal, right? Like thousands of people show up for college football games. Here in Canada, we have the CFL, the Canadian Football League. We have like 6 teams, and 2 of them are called Rough Riders for, like, how do you only have 6 teams and 2 of them have the same name? Like, how do you, like, there's millions of names you could choose, and yet we have 2 that they're the same name. One is a bit of a slur against indigenous people, the Edmonton Eskimos. Eskimo is kind of a unflattering term for the Inuit, the indigenous people who live in the far, far north. So yeah, one is kind of a, shot at indigenous people. 2 have the same name, like, I don't know, whatever. Okay, so never mind the CFL. But yeah, in the US, football is a big deal, right? Both at the college level and at the professional level. And so it might be useful to take a look at the sort of the game or the practice of American football through the eyes of an anthropologist, because yeah, maybe it will tell us something about American culture. So first off, I'll show you this graphic here, and what can you tell me about what you see here, or who you see here? What's that? Okay, so we've got a bunch of football players, right? And they're all wearing jerseys. They're all different colors, right? What else?
Oh, they're all captains?
Could be. What makes you think they're captains?
Because usually the captain is the most important player in the team,
Right.
which will be in the front always.
Okay. So we've got
Here, norm.
right. So interesting. So teams have captains, right? So I don't know. Do you think that's kind of a military reference, or there's some kind of hierarchy inside the team, right? Like some players have more power than others. We could say that. What else do you see about these figures here? What else do you notice? They're what? Well, it's true. Football has been linked to people getting concussions and having brain injuries from that. That's true. Are these men or women? How do you know?
From the body shape.
Yeah. Their body shape, these players' body shape is very masculine, right? So, they've got, they're kind of big muscular guys, right? These football players, because they're out there muscling each other around and pushing and shoving and running. So they're very muscular men, but also their equipment, their padding also exaggerates that, right? So they've got these big shoulder pads, big helmet, kind of less padding on their legs, right? So you get a very like male silhouette, right? This is not, an upside down triangle is not really a female silhouette, right? That's a male silhouette. The shoulders, the head, these guys look very masculine because they're big guys and they're very in shape, but their equipment makes them even more masculine, right? Makes them look even more tough. What else do you see going on here? How are they standing? Yeah, power pose, right? They're standing there with their legs apart, hands on the hips, kind of like Superman when he's like standing there with his cape flying. These guys are all standing in a very powerful way, right? They're not kind of standing there like, you know, looking meek or whatever. They're looking very powerful, right? Very strong. And that might tell us something a little bit about masculinity, right? In the US. What should men be? Well, according to football, maybe this is what they should be. Maybe they should be tough, right? And strong and muscular and powerful, right? Maybe those are the things that Americans like to see in their men. Maybe that's what masculinity has to do with strength and power and ruggedness, right? And, you know, a body that's very muscular, right? Maybe those are aspects of masculinity in America. Do you see anything else here? Anything worth noting?
Yeah, also like I've noticed American football teams also like players always choose like big numbers,
Mm-hmm.
which might that the interpreted might be more masculine.
Yeah, that's interesting.
99.
Yeah. Is that true? Do they choose the higher numbers?
Maybe that also could be interpreted because they want to be opposite as the UK or the rest of the world, from 1 to 10 usually.
Could be. Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I don't know. It would be interesting to almost do like a psychological thing about the player's choice of numbers. The 99 thing, I actually know the story of that because I was, when I was a kid, I grew up in Edmonton, and the greatest hockey player ever, Wayne Gretzky, was actually playing in Edmonton at the time. So he was kind of a big deal. And so, and he was on our team, and it was very exciting. We had a really good team when I was a kid. And he said he chose, so his number was 99. And it was significant because no other player on any team had 99. And he said the reason he chose it is because of his hero. And his hero was an earlier hockey player named Gordie Howe. And Gordie Howe was number 9 all the time. So Wayne Gretzky wanted to choose number 9 too, but the first team that he wound up being drafted to, somebody else was already number 9. And he was like, ugh, cripe, I can't take 9. So someone suggested to him, well, why don't you choose 99, 2 nines? And at first he thought, oh, well, that's kind of ridiculous. Are people going to make fun of me? Because I think people had a tendency to choose lower numbers. But he decided to go with it, and of course, it's kind of an iconic number now. Like you cannot play in the National Hockey League and you cannot wear 99. Because if you do, people will be like, who do you think you are? Like, you can't wear that number. You can, and I think a lot of people have, sort of chosen like 66 or 77 in kind of a similar way as Wayne Gretzky did, but nobody can wear 99 now. If anyone tried, there would be talk. People would be like, you can't wear 99. Come on, who do you think you are? But yeah, it would be interesting to know about the psychology of how players choose their numbers and what it means. And, do they choose higher numbers because it makes them feel better? Or in Wayne Gretzky's case, it was trying to be like his idol, but he couldn't get number 9. I don't know. It's an interesting question, though. Okay, so here we have a bunch of big, masculine, strong guys. And maybe that has something to do with American ideals of masculinity and what it is to be a man. But of course, there are women at the football game too, right? And so what's their job? Yeah, they're cheerleaders, right? They're there to dance, they're there to cheer. What else are they there to do?
Support, like moral.
Yeah, some moral support for the team, right? If the team is doing really well, then it's their job to like get the crowd even more excited. And if the team is losing, it's the cheerleaders' job to try to like raise morale, right? To sort of raise the energy in the building. So they have a job to do here. What do we notice about these people?
Only women.
They're all women, right? Although some cheerleading squads include men now as well because they're stronger and can throw these girls 30 feet in the air, which seems terrifying. But anyway, yeah, most of them are women. What else do we notice? Yeah, all these women are blonde, and that was kind of an accident. I did a Google search for cheerleaders, and I pulled this image kind of randomly. But I wonder if we did kind of a survey, I wonder if we would find that most cheerleaders are blonde. Do you think so? Maybe? Could we agree that like maybe in the US that blonde is kind of a desirable hair color? Yeah, it kind of is, right? So I actually wouldn't be surprised if a good portion of cheerleaders were blonde, but I don't know for sure. And it's just kind of an accident that in this picture they are. But again, maybe it's not an accident because maybe lots of them are in fact blonde. What else do we know about these or observe about these people?
Short jersey.
Right. So their uniforms are quite a bit different from the football players, right? The football players' uniforms are protective because they're out there throwing themselves into each other, but they're also accentuating their masculinity. And what's going on here? Yeah, we're trying to accentuate femininity, right? So there's lots of tight uniforms, there's lots of really short skirts, right? There's lots of skin being shown. Hair is kind of loose so that it can fly around everywhere, right? So there's a real emphasis on being feminine, right? And sort of showing their body, right? What else? What else has happened? What else do we notice about these people?
Their expression.
Mm-hmm.
You have to always smile when you're
Yeah, their demeanor, right? They're expected. Cheerleaders are expected to be cheerful, right, and happy, right? So yeah, they're all smiling. They all look like they're having a great time out there. What else do we notice about them?
Their outfit colors are so bright.
Okay, so they have very colorful outfits, and I assume that they're the same colors as the team, I would imagine, right? Right, so they kind of show that they're part of the team or they belong to the team. What else do we notice about them?
Doing the same act.
Oh. Right, so they're all kind of doing the same thing, right? They have synchronized dances, or at least they're all cooperating to do one dance or one routine. What else do we notice?
They need to be like really high, like they need to show a lot like of emotions. Like they need to express a lot.
Exaggerate.
Oh, okay, so they
Exaggerate,
they have to what?
exaggerate.
Oh, okay, yeah, definitely that's true, and probably that's part of the job, right? If you're going to try to communicate your emotions to an entire stadium, you have to project, right? You have to be big and exaggerated. What about the age of these women?
Middle age, 25 to 30.
That's not middle age. But in the grand scheme of things, they're quite young, right? I think if you looked at the stats for all of these girls, they're probably in their early 20s, early to mid 20s maybe. There's no 65-year-old cheerleaders, right? Yeah, that's not a thing, right? These are all young women. What about their level of physical attractiveness, would you say?
Oh
Yeah, right. So these girls are all young, They're all in shape, right? There's no overweight cheerleaders. Although I would argue if you're dancing around like crazy for hours and hours, that probably helps. But they're all in shape. They're all quite young. They're all pretty, right? And so might that tell us something about what's kind of idealized or preferred for women in America? Maybe it does, right? Maybe these women are kind of trying to portray some sort of ideal, right? They're young, they're pretty, they're happy, they're dancing around, they've got blonde hair, and they're showing a lot of skin. Maybe that's something that is desirable or preferred for women in the US. Maybe. Okay, so we're at the football game here. We've got men and women on the field. There's lots of people watching, of course, and the men are out there playing the football, and the women's job is to cheer on, right, and to provide moral support. Now that's kind of interesting because whose job do you think is more valued at the football game, men or women? Men, right? Because the whole reason that people are there is to watch the game, right? They're not necessarily there to watch the cheerleaders. Maybe they do, but they're there to watch the game, right? And can cheerleaders score any points for the team? No, right? So the kind of meaningful activity of the football game, women don't really have a meaningful role. They're not on the field, they can't score any points. They're literally on the sidelines, right? And their job is to support the men, to cheer on the men, to smile and always be happy for the men, while the men do the real work of the football game. And it's interesting to think about that in terms of society, right? And is that what's expected of women in society, right? Do men do the real work, and is women's job to support the man? And obviously that's changing, but I'm thinking more of traditional cultural values, right? Is the role of the woman to go out there and bring home the bacon, as they say, or is the woman's job to support her husband and cheer him on, but at the same time kind of stay on the sidelines? Maybe. I'll let you make up your own mind about that. Sometimes, and I don't know if they still do this, I've read about it, but I haven't seen it, but I've seen different versions of it. Sometimes, I think at the college level, they'll have what they call powder puff football games. Have you ever heard of this? Probably not. Okay, here's what happens. The powder puff football game, what happens is the men and women here, they switch jobs, switch roles. So the girls here, they put on the equipment and the helmet and that, black stuff they put under the football players put under their eyes, and they go out there and they play football. And the men dress up and cheer on the girls from the sidelines, okay? So it's a little bit of a role reversal. Now, having never seen a game like this, what is your kind of expectation? Do you think that the women play like a serious hard game of football, or do you think they just horse around? What? Horse around? Maybe Victoria's thinking about it. What do you think?
I don't know. It could be both. Like, it depends on their intentions.
Right. What would you do?
I wouldn't, horse around.
You wouldn't horse around?
Yeah, it's really, weird. Because the concept itself is pretty sexist. So, I wouldn't, implement for people to have,
Say that one more time, the concept itself?
Yeah, the concept is really sexist. So I wouldn't implement for people to keep on having sexist thoughts, women can do it as well as men.
Bingo. Yeah, exactly. So that's actually what happens. The women go out there and they play a solid game, right? They run hard, they do the best they can, they throw the ball. They play a real game of football. These ladies are not screwing around. And of course, they're all in excellent shape, so they're all good athletes. And yeah, they're not professional football players, but they play a good game of football, right? And probably for the reason that you say, right, is that it's almost like a challenge, right? It's almost like, the men play football, but women can do just as good of a job. Watch this, right? And they do it. That's exactly what happens. Now, what about the men? Do you think that the men have the same attitude and they try to seriously do good cheers, or do you think they horse around?
Absolutely.
They absolutely horse around, and they do, right? They're ridiculous, right? Even imagining a man in a costume like this is a little ridiculous. But yeah, they don't take it so seriously. So they horse around a little bit, they have fun with it. It's kind of a goofy thing that they do, right? But that's interesting. Why don't they feel the same pressure to kind of live up to the example that the girls have set? Why do they horse around? Because I think we could agree, if you watch some of these cheer teams, especially like modern cheer teams, it's a lot of work, right? The choreography, the athleticism. Some of these girls are being, thrown in the air, and then they're being caught and catapulted another way. Like, you almost have to be, half dancer, half gymnast in order to do this kind of stuff. And it's amazing, right? It's quite a feat. And yet, not that the male football players should start throwing each other around, that's going to be dangerous, but why don't they feel the need to kind of try to rise to the level of the women?
Because if they switch off, they will be has to do it. They have to do it, and if they do it properly,
Mm-hmm.
they will be think of gay. Or if I do it if I hesitate, they will know I'm joking. I'm not taking it seriously. But if they do, okay, this guy should not play with men.
Yeah.
Should be stepping with them.
Yeah. So at the football game, men's contribution to that game is much more valued than women, right? And so when the women get a chance to do the same thing, to play the game, they play hard, right? They play to win. When men get a chance to do women's work, they don't take it seriously, right? Because it's not that valued. And to take it seriously, to take work that is not valued seriously, it's like, dude, like, relax. What's wrong with you? Why are you so intense about this cheerleading thing? Or, because there is, in the US, but in other places as well, because there's a certain amount of homophobia circulating around, men, it's very desirable for men to be strong and tough and powerful, but at the same time, there's a very strong feeling that men should not be anything feminine, right? Because that's associated with women, and it's also associated with being gay, which is, to some Americans, also a really bad thing. So yeah, so men don't take this seriously because of their kind of the cultural values of whose work is more important, men's or women's. And also, one wouldn't want to be, as a man, one wouldn't want to be too feminine, right? Because that would diminish the men, right? Whereas if a woman could play football, maybe that might make her more masculine, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? That's almost a mark of pride that these women could go out there and do the same thing as men can, right? So paying attention to this, and particularly when the roles are reversed, might show us a little bit about not only what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman, but also whose contribution is valued more. And is that true of society as well? Are men's contributions valued more than women's in American society? Are men paid more than women in American society? Yeah, so again, and the football game echoes that message, right? It reinforces that idea. What's this thing? Do you know what this thing is? Yeah, the positions and kind of a game plan or a plan for a particular play, right? So here we've got a diagram of the field. There's the end zone, which you have to get if you know anything about football, you have to get the football into the end zone, but of course you have to carry it. You can't just huck it into the end zone. You've got to have possession of it in the end zone. And so here we have a little plan for a play, right? So there's all these little blue dots, and they've all got little abbreviations for their positions, like the quarterback and the fullback and the halfback and the tackle and the wide receiver and all. I don't really know football very well. I'm flexing here because I don't know football at all. But here we have all these positions and some arrows, and this is what's going to happen, right? The ball's going to go to the quarterback, and this is where everybody goes, right? This is what everyone does. Who usually draws this up? Who makes these diagrams usually? Yeah, the coach does, right? The coach makes up these diagrams. So in this team, there's a hierarchy, right? We already said that there's a captain, right? There's some players that have kind of more power and more say than others. Sometimes it's the quarterback because the ball always comes to him first, right? And then he has to throw it to somebody. So there's the quarterback, or there's the captain, but then there's the coach, right? So this team has kind of a hierarchy. Some people are in power. Some people are telling others what to do. And so if you want to be successful, you got to listen to the boss, right? You got to listen to the coach. There might also be something to be said in the positions too. So when the ball goes to the quarterback, people don't just run off and do whatever they want, right? Like, not everybody runs to the end zone and tries to catch the ball. That's not how it works. Everybody's got a specific job to do, right? And so if you want to be successful, you need to play your position, right? You've got to do your job. And so if you're a fullback there, right there, if you're a fullback, when the ball comes to the quarterback, you're going to rush forward and make sure that nobody tackles the quarterback, right? You're not running to the end zone to catch the ball. That's not your job, right? Your job is to protect the quarterback so that he has long enough to throw the ball to a wide receiver whose job it is to run to the end zone. So maybe this tells us a little something about American society or American business society as well, right? If you want to be successful, you do your job and you listen to the boss, right? That's how we succeed. Everybody does their job and doesn't just do whatever they feel like, right? Now, where am I here? Okay. So again, this is kind of looking at the game through the eyes of an anthropologist, and maybe there's nothing to it, right? Maybe there's nothing to it, but it is interesting to think how messages that are kind of circulating in American culture also are present in the football game, right? And maybe in the same way, maybe this is why Americans like football so much, because outside of the US, football really isn't a big deal, right? American football, not really. Some Canadians watch it. Hockey's really more our thing, right? In other countries, is American football a big thing? In your own countries? No, nobody cares, right? It's only the Americans who are really into it. And in part, I kind of wonder if, because it's so reflective of their cultural values and who they are, that's why it resonates so much with them, right? Just like the Kwakwaka'wakw ceremony, where we went back in time and we watched it and we're like, what is this about? This is very weird. Whereas the Kwakwaka'wakw are like, yeah, I get this. I see what's happening here. And so maybe on some kind of subconscious level, yes, the Americans enjoy the sport of football because it's a competitive sport and people like to watch those, but it also kind of reflects their value system, right? It also resonates with them in a way that it doesn't resonate with Canadians or with people in other countries, maybe. Or at least that's what an anthropologist might say. Maybe.
If somebody like American does not like football, American football, I'm not really American. That's what they want.
Yeah. I've wanted to do this. I've never really gotten a chance to or had the time to, but I've wanted to do this same kind of idea with hockey, because hockey is, obviously people play it around the world, but Canadians really like hockey. They're into it and they identify with it. And I think there might be something to. Why do you think Canadians like hockey?
Because it's like more cultural, because we're up there, snow, hockey.
Right. Yeah, so here we are in a country that's kind of cold in the winter, and many places in Canada get snow all the time. And here we have a sport that's played in the cold on ice, right? So maybe that resonates a little bit with us, right? The game is actually taking place on something that most of us deal with, 5 months out of the year. Not here in Vancouver, but the rest of Canada does. Yeah, maybe that's part of it. What else? What else do you perceive about hockey as a game? I think that even though Canadians are kind of stereotypically polite, right? We have this idea that we're all very polite and we say please and thank you and oh hello and how you doing, eh? And we have this kind of we have this image or reputation as being very polite and nice. I think there's another side of it. The Canadians also perceive themselves as being very tough, right? Because we live up here in the north, right? The cold north, and it's dark a lot of the year, and it's cold and windy and snowy, and so we're a tough people, right? And there's a certain amount of toughness going on in hockey as well, right? Hockey is the only sport where you can actually fight with someone, right? There's no other, well, unless it's like boxing or MMA, but like in football or basketball, you can't just throw off and start pounding someone else in the face. You can't do that. But in hockey, it's why do they allow it?
The referees don't really
In hockey?
they don't really stop immediately.
Because it's cultural. Because it's oh yeah.
I'm gonna get into hockey now.
Are you? Yeah, there's they don't, yeah, if they're able to, yeah, if they're able to, they might try and separate them out. And sometimes it happens immediately, right? Like the play starts, like the puck gets dropped, and then two guys will just throw off their gloves and start beating the crap out of each other, and the crowd loves it, right? And so there's a real, it's weird, and again, it's not something that happens in any other sport. And it's some critics of hockey have said, look, like you have to stop this, right? It's not part of the game. It's dangerous for players. It's not sending a good message, right? You can't just start punching somebody in the face. So you need to end this practice. But it's something that's always been a part of hockey as a game, like the physical aspect, the toughness of it, and the fact that if you don't like, if another player is kind of elbowing you a little too much, that you drop the gloves and pound the crap out of him right there, right? That's part of kind of how hockey has always been, and some people don't want to let that go. So yeah, there's a physical toughness to it that I think Canadians also, it resonates with them as well. They feel that they're a tough people, and they see that being played out on the ice when these guys beat each other up, but they're okay, right? They're gonna go to the penalty box for 5 minutes and serve their penalty, and then they're gonna be back on the ice for the rest of the game. There was, I forget when it was, but I was watching an Edmonton Oilers game years ago, and I think he was the team captain at the time, Ryan Smith. And Ryan Smith got, I forget if somebody hit him with a stick or a puck, and so he got cut. He got like his kind of eyebrow split open by the stick or the puck. Sticks are pretty hard. I don't know, have you ever held a hockey puck?
Yes.
Yeah, they're like a rock, right? And they're frozen because they've been sliding around the ice. So they're really hard. And so when you get hit with one, you know it. Anyway, he got his kind of eyebrow split open. And so he went to the bench where the players sit, and the team's doctor stitched him stitched him up on the bench, and he went back out in like 3 minutes and kept playing. Yeah. So again, there's a value of toughness, right? There's a value of being tough and being rugged in that game. And so again, I haven't done a full thing on it, but it might be interesting to think about hockey from the Canadian perspective, because I think there's things in the hockey game that resonate with Canadians because of how we like to think about ourselves, or who we like to think we are, I think. But I don't know, have I made you all hockey fans now? Maybe?
Like, change my belief because I believe that American football is the most harsh game in the world.
It's
It's pushing.
yeah,
on
they just like,
body.
they just smash together, right?
When hockey you can hit the other.
Yeah, there's lots of hitting in hockey too. There's rules around when and how you can be physical with another player, but you can do it, right? And so, yeah, hockey's in some ways a dangerous game. And when you see, hockey players, lots of them have false teeth or missing teeth because they've had them knocked out, and they have, their noses have been broken, and they've got scars because they've been stitched up, and it's a tough game. It's a really tough game, and to the point where most players are even resistant to wearing some sort of face covering. And so decades ago, they didn't even wear helmets. Not even the goalies wore helmets. And then players slowly started to wear helmets, but even so, there was a toughness about it. Like, no, I don't want to wear that. And now most players will wear like a plastic visor over their eyes, but even that took a long time for players to accept. But most players still don't cover their face unless you're a goalie. You have to wear a helmet, I think, at this point. That's a rule. But I can still remember a time when I watched hockey and there were players that didn't wear helmets. And insane, but there's a value of toughness in that game, and I think Canadians like that because it's how they like to see themselves, I think, as tough, rugged people. Whether we are is another question, but we like to see ourselves that way. Okay, you want to take a little break? Okay, that's enough hockey talk. We'll cut it off there. We'll take a break. We'll come back and we'll talk about how culture is integrated. Okay. And we are back. Yeah, wow. Chess, football. Now we're going to talk about pigs and then human sacrifice. It's a great class, isn't it? You just never know what's going to come up. Okay, so in talking about football here, talking about hockey, we were talking a little bit about how culture is learned, but also how culture is symbolic, right? And so the suggestion I was making to you is that both the football game for Americans and hockey for Canadians embody kind of messages and values that the culture sees in themselves. And so in watching the game, yes, they get to enjoy, the excitement of a sports match, but also they see their own kind of values and beliefs echoed in that thing. And so it reinforces those cultural lessons that exist elsewhere, right? And there are lots of things in culture that do this. It's not just games. So we learn a cultural lesson or a cultural value, and then and then it's reinforced over and over again by all sorts of different things within society, right? So the football game and the hockey game are not the only examples. There's probably unlimited examples of this kind of thing. And clearly Basil is a football fan here. I just thought I would throw that up. Okay. The third one we wanted to talk about is the idea that culture is integrated, okay? And what that means is that when I say integrated, I mean that it is interconnected, okay? There's lots of different parts of culture that are connected to each other, and they function together to meet the needs of a group of people, right? So we have kind of beliefs, we have values, we have social institutions, we have things that we've created like governments and economies and education systems and families, and all of those things kind of are connected to each other and operate together as a system, kind of like how a car works, right? There's lots of different parts of a car. They're all bolted and connected to each other, and they all operate so that they can carry you down the road, right, and get you where you need to go. And similarly, like a car, because all of these different pieces of culture are interconnected to each other, when one aspect of culture changes, it often changes how other parts work as well, right? And Mr. Baja can confirm for me that if you open the hood of a car and you reach in and you remove a part, is the car going to work the same? No. Something's going to go wrong, right? The car may operate in a strange manner. Features of the car may not work anymore, right? If you remove the heater core, you will have no heat. Or the car may not actually run, right? So changing one aspect of culture will often have repercussions and effects in other parts of culture as well, right? So culture change is something that is always happening, right? Things are being added and removed all the time, but the system has to kind of adjust, right? So a change in one part of culture will have kind of a ripple effect in terms of other parts of culture as well. As an example, we talked about one particular group of people, the Kwakwaka'wakw, from just a little bit up the coast here in British Columbia. These people here are the Kapuku, and they live in, I think I've got a map here. Yeah, they live in kind of the western part of the island of New Guinea in what's now Indonesia. This is their traditional territory. And the Kapuku have kind of the way they live their lives is through farming. So they grow food for themselves. So everyone has kind of a large garden plot out behind their house, and they grow food for themselves and their families. They live in kind of small villages of maybe a few hundred people. And of course, they've probably been living in this part of the world for thousands of years. Now, what I want to talk about, I'm no expert in their culture, of course, but what I want to talk about with regard to the Kapuku is status and power, okay? And so, again, like in most societies, sorry ladies, but in most societies, men are the ones who have the power, the political and social power. And if you want to be a powerful, respected man in Kapuku society, there's something that you need. Any guesses on what it might be? More than one woman? What your guess as to what you might need to be respected and high status in Kapuku society? A set of male genitals. It helps. It helps.
Is it inherited by like son to father?
Oh, okay. So maybe a name, right, or a powerful father. That never hurts. Glory. Oh, okay. So some sort of like military glory, or past dominance over your enemies. Maybe.
Strongest.
Okay, so physical strength, right? You might have to overpower other people, maybe. How much food you have? Perhaps. Riches, okay. Actually, we bumped into a few things that we will talk about. But what you need, above all else, in Kapuku society, if you want to be high status and respected, you need these. So, he's cute, eh? Look at that little guy. So cute, but so tasty, right? Yeah. You need pigs to be high status and a person of status in Kapuku society. And the reason why you need pigs is because this is kind of how men build social relationships in Kapuku society. So here in our society, we might, go for beers, with guys might go out for beers, or they might go and play golf, or go to a hockey game or a football game. That's kind of how they kind of bond and build relationships. But in Kapuku society, they bond and build relationships in a sort of a social and political and financial way by exchanging pigs with each other. Okay? And so the Kapuku will often have, little kind of ceremonies / parties in which they give pigs to other men, right? And so the idea is that, if I'm a man in Kapuku society and Mulder's a man in Kapuku society, and I say, this is a great day, it's my friend Mulder, I give you this pig. And you, of course, will be very gracious and you'll say, thank you for this pig. I, will cherish it always. Whatever. I don't know what they say. But then the idea is that now that I've given you a pig, you owe me a pig, right? Not immediately, not now, maybe not next week, maybe not even next year, but you kind of owe me. There's an obligation, right? And that's important, right? Those things are important for building relationships, right? The obligation, right? If I give you a birthday present, should you get one for me when my birthday comes around?
Yes.
Yeah.
Pay and give it back.
Yeah. It's what anthropologists would call reciprocity, right? So if something is given to you, like a birthday gift or a pig in this case, there's kind of an obligation. It's like, okay, I should repay at some point, right? And again, not immediately. With the birthday gift, I wouldn't give you a birthday gift immediately. I would wait until your birthday and then give it to you. But there's kind of this reciprocity, right? Give and take. I will give something to you, and hopefully you will return that at some point in the future, right? And so it kind of works like this for pigs with the Kapuku. And so pigs are given, and then later on pigs are given back, right? And maybe more pigs are given. So if I give Mulder a pig, then I get a little bit of respect, right? It's like, oh, that was so nice of me, right? That was so nice of me to give him the pig. Plus, it kind of shows that I'm a man of means, right? I can just give this pig to him, and it's not a big deal, right? It's no problem for me to give him a pig. And maybe in a year or two, Mulder comes back. We have a bit of a celebration, and Mulder gives me 3 pigs. right? He repays the original, but then he gives a gift of 2 more. And it's like, oh, I'm like, oh, you're clearly very gracious and, you know, very high status that you could just give me 3 pigs and it's just not a thing, right? So it's like, oh, okay, so next time Mulder and I get together, I can't just give him 3 pigs. I've got to give him 5 pigs, right? So it kind of goes like this, and men try to, like, you know, give pigs and receive pigs and give them again in a way that kind of builds wealth, but they're always kind of giving away, and they're always trying to outgive the other man, right? Because the man who can give more, the man who can be more generous, that's the one who gets more respect, right? So it's kind of the opposite of here in the West. Here we kind of give respect when people accumulate a lot, right? Like everyone's making a big deal about, you know, Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk because they're the richest person in the United States or something. But for the Kapuku, it's like, well, no, it's not about having a lot, it's about giving a lot. And the more you can give, the more people respect you. And so men will try to sort of give pigs and then receive back later and give again in kind of a strategic way that, you know, keeps building their wealth. And maybe eventually, you know, I'm exchanging pigs with Mulder, but also with other men. Maybe I get to the point where I have like 100 pigs, right? And so I have a big party and I invite all these men and I'm like, 10 pigs for, it's like Oprah, 10 pigs for you, Mulder, and, you know, 12 for you, Baja, and no, I'm going to give you 16 pigs, and everybody gets a pig, right? I'm giving pigs away everywhere. But that raises my status as well, right? I throw this big party and I'm giving away all these pigs, and now you guys are like, oh, well, now I've got to do the same thing, right? I've got to come up with more pigs. And so it's this kind of system that keeps feeding itself where men have to continue to try to outdo themselves, which men kind of, I think, do in lots of cultures. They just find different ways to do it. But you're always trying to outdo the other men. You're trying to outcompete them, right? Whether it's in sports or in, you know, the toys you have, the car or the phone or whatever, or maybe it's your clothing, or men often try to outdo themselves in some way. And so here with the Kapuku, they do it by giving pigs. Now here's where the culture gets integrated. If I have 100 pigs that I'm going to give away soon, I have to feed those pigs, do I not? I definitely do, right? The pigs have to eat. And it turns out that in the Kapuku society here, the pigs eat yams or sweet potatoes, okay? So the question, of course, is where do these sweet potatoes come from? And as it turns out, they come from the garden of women. Women are the ones who tend these gardens. Women are the ones who grow the potatoes. So if I want to feed my pigs to give to other men, I will need sweet potatoes from the garden of a woman. Do you think any woman's just going to give me a bunch of sweet potatoes for my pigs? No. What am I going to have to do? Nope. I'm going to have to, yeah, I'm going to have to put a ring on it, right? I'm going to have to marry her. No random woman is just going to give me potatoes for no reason. So I will need a wife in order to access this food, to feed the pigs, to give to other men, right? And here's where it, of course, gets more integrated, is that is any woman going to marry me if I'm like some no-status guy that nobody respects? No. Yeah, women don't like to marry people that nobody respects, right? Women like to marry men of standing, men who have a good reputation in the community, right? That's who women like to marry. Of course, I know women like the bad boys, and there's that thing as well, but we won't get into that. But so I have to kind of build some status at the same time, right? So the higher up I am in the community, the more likely a woman will want to marry me, the more access I'll have to potatoes, I can trade pigs, and I can kind of rise up the social ladder that way. Now, if I want more potatoes for more pigs, what might I do?
Another one.
Marry another woman, right? Because then I'll have two women giving me potatoes to feed all these pigs that I can give away. And so I can continually rise the ladder. Maybe I'll marry yet another woman and I'll have 3 wives, which is allowed in this culture. And so you can kind of see how all of these things are connected to each other, right? The political life of kapuku men, right, in terms of who's higher on the higher status. Their economic life is connected. There's this exchange of pigs and potatoes going on. And their social life, in terms of marriages and relationships with other men in the community, all of these things are kind of functioning together, right? So these pigs are getting exchanged. Sometimes they're getting eaten, but not always. These pigs are getting exchanged, and the community is kind of having other economic exchanges as well. Relationships between, villagers are being cemented and formed. People are getting married and, of course, having kids in the process. And so all of these things are kind of working together as a system. But as you might imagine, there might be a problem, right? Because if I want to be the red guy there, if I want to be the high status guy, and let's say I need 3 wives to make that happen, that might be a little bit of a problem, might it? What might be the problem there? Not necessarily.
You have no pigs?
I have no.
Pigs.
No, it's not the pig problem. But if I have 3 wives, that means that other men in the community might not have any, right? Because most communities are about 50-50 men and women, right? That's usually about how it works out. Men tend to die earlier, so in terms of old people, there tend to be more older women than older men. But in terms of marriage age people, communities tend to be a 50-50 split. And so if I start taking 3 wives or 4 wives, or a few men start taking 3 or 4 wives, that means that there are other men in the community who might not be able to find a wife, right? Is that a problem? Yeah, why?
For them, not for the person who's getting married.
No, but for them, yeah, what's their problem?
They can't go out, they can't marry to get potatoes, to get pigs, to get higher.
Right. They're not only can they not get married, which might diminish their standing in the community, right? People might not look at them as real men if they're not married, but yeah, they're shut out of this whole system, right? Because they don't have a wife, they don't have potatoes, they can't really hold any quantity of pigs at one time, and they can't really rise up the ladder, right? So their kind of status in the community, their sort of political status, is connected to the ability to marry at least one woman. And so if some guys start taking 3 and 4 wives, that means that other guys may not have any. And then, they're shut out of this system. But culture is integrated, right? So fortunately, these kapuku people, not that they're the only culture that does this, but they often like to engage in warfare. And so it's not kind of the warfare that we're used to. They don't go over to a neighboring village and kill everyone and burn it to the ground and take their stuff. It's not that kind of warfare. It's kind of a little more troublemaking warfare. So they will get kind of dressed up in their sort of feathers and ceremonial traditional clothing, and they'll arm themselves, and they'll make a big fuss, and they'll go over to the neighboring village, and they'll run around and chase people. Maybe they might burn a house or 2, and sometimes in the process, someone will get killed. And if someone gets killed, that's kind of the end of it. Everyone goes home. And although, to follow, there's often payback with pigs, right? So if you happen to kill one of their villagers, sometimes the villages will make peace with a pig exchange, right? That will be a way of kind of healing the fact that someone has died. But that's another thing. But because some of these men die in warfare, is the sex ratio 50-50 in these communities? Not quite, right? There's actually a few more women than there are men. So it's actually possible for some men to acquire more wives, and it doesn't really leave other men without wives, right? So again, this practice of warfare is also connected to marriage and to economic exchanges and to their political fortunes, because that allows some men to take more wives without depriving other men of a wife altogether, right?
Do they still exist? They're tribes?
Yeah, they still exist. Their kind of culture and way of living is probably different than traditional, than it traditionally was. They were, they've been exposed to European visitors for a few hundred years now. Indonesia is a real modern country, and so their lives have changed from what they traditionally were, but I think they still exist. And you could probably trek off into the jungles and encounter some Kapuku people, I would imagine, but I don't know for sure. But yeah, I think they're still around. Maybe not practicing a perfectly traditional way of life as they used to, but I'm certain they're still around. And of course, they're just one of New Guinea, as I recall it, is a very culturally diverse island, and so the Kapuku are just one culture that has traditionally existed on that island that has probably dozens of cultures and dozens of languages as well. It's a really interesting place, and lots of anthropologists have gone to New Guinea to study culture, because there's so many different cultures and they're sort of very diverse and very interesting. The Kapuku are just one. Right, so all these things are integrated, and so again, you can imagine what happened when Christian missionaries started to arrive in New Guinea in maybe the 17 or 1800s, and they tried to convert them to Christianity, as missionaries do, but they also sort of disapproved of some Kapuku practices, right? So Christian missionaries kind of said, ooh, you really shouldn't run over to the neighboring village and kill people. God says that's no good, right? Thou shalt not kill. You guys shouldn't do that. That's bad, right? So they kind of convinced the Kapuku to kind of stop engaging in warfare with other people. I believe they also stopped, or asked the Kapuku to stop eating other people, but that's a whole other, cannibalism is a whole other thing. But you can imagine, for instance, how that would affect Kapuku culture, having these people come in and try to get them to stop engaging in warfare. Because if men aren't killed in warfare, what happens to that sex ratio? It goes back to equal. That means that men can't take more than one wife, or when they do, some men are left with no wife, right? Does that mess with the economic system of the culture? Yeah. Does it mess with people's political fortunes and status within the community? Yeah. Does it interfere with the Kapuku's idea of what it means to be a man? Yeah. All of those things are going to be affected, and more undoubtedly. But just by making that little change, just by saying, hey, maybe you shouldn't go over to the neighboring village and kill anyone anymore, let's not do that. Even making that small change has had repercussions for the Kapuku people in all kinds of different ways, because all of these different activities were connected to one another, and they were kind of operating in cooperation, right? And to end one thing kind of throws the whole system off balance, right? Okay, good so far? All right. Okay, so there's a few slides here. I've talked about all these things. The last thing I'll say about culture being shared here, that was the fourth thing, is we have to remember that culture is kind of an abstract thing, right? It's something that is practiced by a group of people. So there's something called Canadian culture. I'm not quite sure what it is, but I think it exists. But it's not something that you can really study directly, right? You can't take out your notepad and say, I'm looking at Canadian culture and studying it, right? Really what you have to do is culture is something we do with each other, right? It's an interaction with each other. And so anthropologists have to look at interactions between individuals and kind of extrapolate that, make generalizations from that describe the entire culture. Because you can't look at culture, right? Because culture's kind of an abstract concept, right? So anthropologists look at individual behaviors and then try to describe culture based on that, okay? Right. I don't know what that slide was about. Okay, two other things I want to talk about here, ethnocentrism and cultural relativism. Have you ever heard either of these terms before? No? Awesome. Okay, new words. So when we kind of learn about different cultures or encounter different cultures, it's very easy to kind of compare them to our own and to make judgments about it. And I think that's kind of a very natural thing, right? Is humans are constantly, observing things, comparing things to what we already know, saying what we like and what we don't like. We're doing some online shopping for something and we're scrolling through and we're like, yeah, nope, don't like that. Oh, that's good. And we're constantly kind of comparing and analyzing and making judgments. And I think we can very easily do that with cultures as well. And so the question is, how do we react and respond to cultures that have practices or beliefs that are quite different from our own, right? And so to talk about this, I wanted to talk about this culture here. Is anyone familiar with these guys? No? All right. You've heard of them? Okay. All right. So, good. So the people I'm referring to here are Aztecs. And the Aztecs are an indigenous people, a people indigenous to Central America. They traditionally lived in what's now Mexico. And they're kind of, the time in which we know about them has to do, or comes from about the 14th to the 16th century. So the 13 to 1500s. Okay, so that's kind of when we know about them. Believe it or not, this sounds made up, but it's not. They actually built this huge, elaborate city on top of a lake, believe it or not. And unfortunately, though, the city was destroyed. It was destroyed by Hernando Cortez, who was a conquistador explorer from Spain. And after the city was destroyed, they built the modern Mexico City right on top of the Aztec city. And so it's quite a story, and I'll outline it for you shortly. But yeah, the Aztecs were, still are, an indigenous group from Central America, from Mexico, who lived there hundreds of years ago. Right. So in Mexico, in kind of the 1300s or so, there were a number of different cultures already living there. And so there were these Zapotec people, these Mixtec people, there's Tenochtitlan people, Tlaxcala people living there. And the Aztecs were kind of a late arrival, okay? So we don't know where they came from. For some reason, they left their original homeland and wandered for quite some time. And their god, who I think it was Quetzalcoatl is the name of their god told them that, yes, wander for a while, and when you see an omen from me, that's where you will settle and build your settlement. And the omen they were looking for was a cactus. You know what a cactus is? Yeah, it was a cactus with a eagle on the top and a snake in the eagle's beak. That's what they were looking for. And when they saw that, that was supposedly the sign from the god that this is where they should stay. And so they wandered around for quite some time, and eventually they saw this. They saw this omen and they settled. And so they settled in this area here. And unfortunately, for them, the groups that were already living there didn't really like the Aztecs and didn't really want them to settle. They didn't want to give them any land, and so they weren't really welcome in this part of the world when they arrived. And so as a result, the Aztecs were forced to kind of build their city in a very novel way. And so there was a very large, shallow lake in the area. So it wasn't very deep. It had a lot of mud on the bottom. The water wasn't very good for drinking, but it was really all they had. And so what they started to do was they started to build islands. And so what they would do, I won't draw it on the board because nobody at home will see it, but they cut down trees and made these kind of tall logs, and they pounded them into the mud. So they pounded them into a mud in kind of a box shape, if you can imagine. So they created kind of a box in the lake, in the water. And then they filled the box with all kinds of rocks and dirt and sand and all kind of things. And so when they got above the water level, they had a little island, right? So they built one of these, and then another one, and another one, and another one. And they kept building these little islands with making a box of wooden logs that they pounded into the mud, filling that box with rocks and dirt and sand and things like that, and then continuing to build. And what they eventually wound up with, believe it or not, was something that looked like this. Yeah. And so it's almost hard to believe that with a very simple technique and a massive amount of work, that they could actually construct something that looked like this. But it seems that they did. Unfortunately, there's no way to kind of know exactly what the city looked like. The city was called Tenochtitlan, if you want to know. There's no way to know what this looked like because, again, it was destroyed by Cortez and Mexico City was built right over top of it. And incidentally, that also means that Mexico City is built on top of a lake as well. So if you go to Mexico City, you will see that some of the buildings are kind of settling strange. So some of the buildings are like on an angle. Some of the buildings like have a staircase, but the staircase is like this and the building has sunk. And so there's some places in Mexico City where, you know, the city has settled strangely because it's sitting on top of this ancient city that is sitting on top of a lake. But anyway, they constructed this thing. And so we don't really know exactly what it looked like. We have descriptions from the time. And so some artists have tried to imagine what it might have looked like. And I think you have to admit it's pretty impressive, right? And in the center of the city there, all of those are stone buildings. So these islands were strong enough to support stone foundations and stone buildings. And here you can see in the middle, they've actually built an aqueduct because, like I mentioned, the lake water was not really good to drink. And so they were actually bringing in fresh water from the surrounding mountains into the city. And so in the middle of the city, there'd be a fountain of fresh water that the people could come and fill their jugs every day to have fresh water from the city. So pretty remarkable construction and engineering, right? Right, and in the middle of the city, you can see that the aqueduct leads to the middle, and there's this giant temple in the middle of the city, the Temple Mayor, which I think is just the major temple, and it was dedicated to two of the Aztecs' main gods. So at the top, you can see there's two little houses there. One was for the god of war, and one was for the god of rain. I think it's Quetzalcoatl and Huitzilopochtli, but I'm not sure. Don't quote me on those. So they had a major temple to their two gods right in the center of town, right? And sadly, of course, none of this is there anymore. And nowadays, it actually looks like this. And so you can see there's an archaeological site that's been cleared away, and some of these pebbles and stairs here are really all that's left of the Temple Mayor from 400, 500 years ago or so, which is kind of sad. But you can see there's modern Mexico City is all around it. So here we are in an Aztec city. So what I'd like you to do is put on your Tony Stark space-time GPS, and we're going to zip back to, let's say, 1400 AD, okay? So this is before Cortez, this is before Columbus, right? So there's no Europeans here, nobody knows this exists. It's just an Aztec city flourishing, right? So we're gonna zip back in time, and again, we're gonna pretend that nobody takes any notice of us, but I'm sure they would in real life. And we'll just kind of walk around, right? And so we might walk around the city kind of observing, and we would see people walking around and kids playing, I'm sure, kids going to school because the Aztecs had an education system and they taught their kids things. We would probably see priests walking around and government officials. We'd probably walk by a market where people were selling all kinds of goods, probably lots of food and, you know, chickens and clay pots and jewelry. Feathers were apparently very highly valued for Aztec costumes, and so feathers were very expensive, but of course you could buy them in the market. And then eventually we might make it to the Temple Mayor, right? And so we might make it to the foot there, and we'd see these stairs rising up quite high. And if we kind of got there at the right time, we might see the Aztecs making a sacrifice to the sun god from the top of the temple. And I'll describe this to you, and maybe this is the last thing I'll do for today, but I'll describe this sacrifice to the sun god to you. So what would happen is they would bring in the sacrifice, which was a living human person, okay? Most of the time these people were captured in warfare, so they were kind of people from the surrounding area. Sometimes they were Aztecs, but a lot of times they were outside people. And what would happen is they would lead this person in to the altar at the top of the temple, and they would lay them down on an altar. Okay, so they'd lay them down on the altar, and one priest would hold their wrists, and another priest would hold their ankles, and the third priest would take one of these knives made of flint. And I know they don't look like much, but flint is really sharp. It's a stone that has a very smooth texture, so it's not very chunky. And so when you break it, it has a really sharp edge. Okay, and so and these are the real deal. These are from a museum in Mexico. So these are actual Aztec stone knives. And what the priest would then do is go over to the person who is stretched out on the altar and cut into them right under their rib cage. They're still alive, by the way. Cut into them, reach in, and pull out their heart. And so the heart is like still beating, and offer it to the sun god. And then after that was finished, he would put the heart into a little pot or jar that was there. I think it would be burned. I think they would burn the heart, but don't quote me on that part. And then the person would be kind of pushed off the altar and would kind of tumble down the stairs to the bottom. Okay? Now, this is an actual Aztec drawing of this process. So the Aztecs drew this. And so here you can see exactly what I've described happening to you. Here's our sacrifice here. The priest is cutting him open with a knife, and there's his heart being given to the sun god. And you can see at the bottom of the stairs, there's a previous sacrifice that's being dragged away, right? And so, heartless, literally. And so the person dragging him away down here might actually be the warrior who captured him. And so it would be, the warrior would be able to take this person's body, and what they would do with it often was they would, sometimes they would cremate it, so they would burn it. Sometimes they would cut it into pieces and send pieces of the body to like higher ranking Aztecs that they might want to impress. And in some cases, they might eat parts of it as well. This is, I believe, a Spanish drawing. So the Spanish came to Aztec territory and sort of witnessed some of these things. That's how we know some of them were happening. And so here's a Spanish rendition of the Aztecs dealing with a sacrificed person. So, no doubt that's pretty extreme, right? What do you think your reaction would be if we had those space-time GPSs and we went back and we happened to see that ritual? How do you think you would react to that? You'd probably puke, yeah? I think that's probably fair. What else?
I would just run into them, save the guy.
You'd run and save the guy? You are
Some rocks, food, kill the priest. Because they are the main trouble.
you are a brave man. You're like Batman.
Yeah, he was my assistant.
Yeah. What else might be a reaction to that?
Just get it back.
Yeah, you might want to okay, I'm out of here, right? This is bananas. What else? Yeah, it would be pretty graphic and upsetting, right? I hopefully none of us have ever had an experience like this where they've seen this kind of violence. So yeah, that would be pretty shocking, right? This person is dead. That would be pretty shocking as well. It might be frightening, right? Because the question might be, well, who's next, right? If that guy just got killed, am I next? I'm out of here, right? So that might happen too. We might want to run away. We might be frightened. We might be kind of appalled, right? In a moral sense, that they would just murder this person while they're still alive. Yikes, right? Okay, so there's clearly more to talk about, but we're out of time. So I think I'm just going to leave you with that incredibly violent and gory image of an Aztec sacrifice. But we'll come back to it on Monday and pull it apart a little bit and put it into some context. But until then, that is it. I hope everyone has a nice weekend. Thanks for being here, and I will see you all Monday, okay? Cool. Okay, online people, same thing. Bye. Have a great weekend. See you Monday.